As it often did during the quiet moments, Tiberius's mind wandered to all that he had lost. Vipsania, the woman who had been his heart, whose love he had lost to the whims of Augustus, gone, taken from him first by the cruel hand of duty, then by old age and illness. Germanicus, his adopted son, his pride, his mirror in the bellum Battonianum. In Germanicus, Tiberius had seen not just a successor, but a unifier for the fractured Julian and Claudian bloodlines. When the gods had stolen Germanicus, they had taken more than an adopted heir. They had taken the last glimmer of hope for the future of the dynasty. Germanicus Gemellus, Tiberius's grandson, erased from the scrolls of the empire before his little life had truly begun, and Castor, his beloved son, the one who had become the future to which Tiberius clung in the face of all his doubts. His death, sudden, inexplicable, was the final nail in the coffin of Tiberius's hopes. Everything that had once given meaning to Tiberius's life was now lost, sacrificed for an empire he had never sought to rule. As the shadows stretched long across the room, Tiberius wondered if the gods had always meant to leave him alone in the end, bereft of all those he had once loved. Even his mother, the Augusta, he had stopped speaking to, for it was she who started it all. Young and beautiful, pregnant with Tiberius's younger brother, Livia had set her sights on a prize far greater than Tiberius's father. She wanted a god. In this god's home, Tiberius had always been the outsider, stepson of a man who wanted a blood heir, husband of a woman who preferred other men, stepfather of children who despised him, and the heir of last resort for a Rome that had always favoured his wife's children. Now, with no heir of his own blood, no anchor in family or senate, the empire began to look past him. Tiberius could feel it shifting, restless, uncertain, hungry for something new. The legions waited, the people whispered, and in the vacuum left by Castor's death, new figures began to rise. Agrippina, a widow, her sons now ascending in the shadow of his own lineage, and Sejanus, ever ambitious, ever watchful, pushing at the edges of his empire. They each moved like shadows at the corners of Tiberius's mind, making alliances that would fracture the empire. Party of Agrippina or party of Sejanus. More and more of Rome's Senate turned to paying court to Agrippina, while Sejanus moved the Praetorian Guard closer to Claudius, the brother of Germanicus. During his long reign, Augustus had successfully maintained a unifying image to the public, while, from the shadows, ruthlessly removing all who attempted to factionalize Rome, even his own daughter and grandchildren. Tiberius, however, had ruled with transparency, trying to give the Senate back some of the authority it had lost during the civil wars. But even the Senate preferred division. Was it time to let them, the Roman people, the legions, the Senate, tear each other apart for rule of Rome? After all, Tiberius had never asked to carry the weight of Rome on his shoulders. Now perhaps he could walk away, let the factions fight for their victory. The empire had been run by proxy during the 20 months he had been away, and Tiberius had a half-dozen villas on the island of Capri, remote, isolated, away from the city. Why should he care any longer about Rome, about Agrippina, about Sejanus? Weren't they both threatened by the rise of Castor, and didn't both stand to gain from his death? Following the death of Tiberius's son, who had bitterly warned both his father and the Senate that Sejanus, commander of 12,000 Praetorians stationed on Quirinal Hill, wielded too much power in government, a new alliance began to form between the house of Germanicus and the Guard. Perhaps Castor had been right. At nearly 68 years old, was Tiberius now, like Augustus before him, being slowly encircled by those preparing the way for a new generation, just as Livia had once surrounded Augustus with Claudians in his final years. And Sejanus, who had divorced his wife Apicata just before Castor's death, had wasted no time negotiating yet another alliance with Claudius, the brother of Germanicus. The brutal murder of a woman, physically dragged from her bed and thrown from the window during the night, had conveniently left Claudius free to marry Sejanus's sister, Aelia Paetina. But who was it that Sejanus himself hoped to marry? Now within the house of Germanicus, Claudius and Sejanus stood opposite Agrippina, who never ceased reminding the Senate, the people, and the legions that her sons, Nero and Drusus, were the only legitimate descendants of the divine Augustus, and the only worthy successors to his principate. But Castor, apart from being Tiberius's son, was also the grandson of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, father of Augustus's grandchildren, just as Agrippina's sons were. Castor's death brought about a quiet unification among the descendants of Agrippa, many of whom had eagerly anticipated his principate as a long-hoped resurgence of the Julian-Agrippan legacy, a legacy thought lost with the downfall of Augustus's grandchildren. So, the battle for Rome's successor would come from within the house of Germanicus. But from which side? The Claudians, through Claudius, backed by the military strength of the Praetorians, or the Vipsanian line, through Agrippina, whose Agrippan kin were now questioning the mysterious death of Castor? And how long would it be before these two factions dragged Rome once again to the brink of civil war? There was only one course of action that Tiberius could take to forestall the looming civil instability: unify these divided families through marriage. Since the adoption of Nero and Drusus by Tiberius, it was his prerogative as their legal father to choose their wives. The betrothal of Nero Caesar to the daughter of Gaius Silius and Socia Galla, a man found guilty of treason and a woman exiled from Rome, was formally broken. Nero would instead marry Tiberius's granddaughter, Iulia Livia, the teenage daughter of Castor and Livilla. This marriage offered yet another opportunity to unify through their offspring the Julian and Claudian lines. Drusus Caesar, Nero's younger brother, would marry a girl named Aemilia Lepida, daughter of the Pontifex Maximus by his wife Vipsania Marcella, making her a granddaughter of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Now, as Tiberius's newly adopted heirs began to navigate their way up the Cursus Honorum, they would do so with the unified support of the Claudians, the Julians, and the Agrippans. Tiberius would fix his gaze on his new sons. Agrippina, Sejanus, and Claudius could fight among themselves. Despite the fact that Tiberius had adopted Nero and Drusus, setting their feet upon a course that might lead one or both to the princeps curule chair, they were not yet officially heirs of the empire. They were children, with years of learning and guidance ahead of them. Still, this did not stop Rome's priests from suddenly including Nero and Drusus in the daily prayers for Tiberius and for the empire. Even when Tiberius summoned the priests and angrily demanded to know who had instructed them to commit blasphemy, adding the names of the boys to the sacred state prayers, though neither had been consecrated by the Senate with official authority, they prevaricated. It was clear they had done so in the hope of pleasing him. Who but Agrippina would have pressed Rome's priests and augurs to include her sons in the sacred prayers? Was adoption not enough? Or was the long, necessary process of teaching them military strategy, bookkeeping, and the delicate art of holding Rome's factions in balance too slow for her ambition? After all, despite their reconciliation over her lavish gift, this was the same woman who, having decided unilaterally on the guilt of Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso in her husband's death, had urged Tiberius to execute him without due process, just as her grandfather might have done. having spent time in the kingdom of the Nabateans, the land of Egypt, and residing in the Seleucid palace at Syria's Grove of Daphne, Agrippina's concept of authority was shaped by foreign courts and power structures based on blood lineage. Her view of rule stood in stark contrast to Tiberius's belief that Rome's laws should be crafted by the Senate and enforced by the princeps. But for Tiberius, the final break in his already strained relationship with Agrippina came after the trial of yet another of her allies. Claudia Pulchra, Agrippina's cousin and the widow of Publius Quinctilius Varus, was accused of adultery. There was no question of her guilt or innocence. Claudia Pulchra, a widow, was found to be pregnant. Under the laws of Augustus concerning adultery, she was sentenced to exile, but instead she chose to take her own life. Soon after the trial of Claudia Pulchra, while offering a sacrifice to the god Augustus within his temple, Tiberius heard Agrippina approach from behind. "Hypocrite," she said, "you sacrifice to Augustus, yet you persecute his grandchildren." For the second time, quoting in Greek, Tiberius replied to Agrippina, "And if you are not queen, have I wronged you?" As Agrippina's influence grew, bolstered by increasing senatorial support, she began to distance herself from Tiberius. She kept away except in matters of public affairs, as though she believed the father of the nation might remove her, much like she would remove her own opposition. Even at banquets, surrounded by important senators and guests invited to sit at the princeps' table, Agrippina ceased eating, hoping no one would notice, so long as she continued engaging those around her in constant conversation. But Tiberius did notice. "You must do me the honor of at least eating something," Tiberius said to Agrippina, drawing the table to silence. "You've not eaten a thing." He plucked a ripe, glistening apple from a tray of fruit and offered it to her. Agrippina accepted it with a frozen glare, her expression unreadable. Under the watchful silence of the other guests, she handed the apple to her servant and coolly instructed that it be wrapped and saved for later. No one spoke. The message had been received. For Tiberius, Agrippina's refusal to eat the apple at his table, an unspoken insinuation that she feared being poisoned, was too much. What was he to do with a woman who, in public and in silence, accused him of murder? A woman whose ambitions for her sons had already led her to interfere with the state's most sacred rights? So be it. If Agrippina so feared for her life, perhaps it was time for her to leave Rome.